Hi, dear listeners. This is Kate Riga. I'm here to make a quick pitch that you consider becoming a TPM Prime member. TPM has used the member model for over a decade now, and our loyal members are the only reason we've been able to weather the turbulence of the media landscape and avoid the fate that has befallen so many other independent outlets. For $70, you get no paywall, fewer ads, access to the Hive member forum, a members only newsletter, and more. For $140 a year, you get all of that plus no ads at all. Without our members, there is no podcast, not to mention that I'm out of a job. Thank you so much for listening and supporting us. We couldn't do it without you.
Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall Podcast featuring Kate Riga. We are here on Wednesday, November the 6th. It is 12:11 as I am speaking right now. And you know the story. Donald Trump defeated Kamala Harris. It wasn't close. I guess we still have some straggling states out there, but it certainly seems like all the swing states swung in one direction towards Donald Trump. There were more Senate losses than we expected. Although it seems like some of the people some of the senators in the swing states held out. One of the one of the many, I'm not sure I'd call it an irony, just surprises of this campaign cycle, is that I think a year ago, or sometime early in 2024, if you were to have said, of the contested Senate races, who's the one who's definitely going to be reelected and who's the most doubtful, I think you'd probably say that Ruben Gallego was the most touch and go. I mean, of the people who were kind of credible candidates, and Casey in Pennsylvania was the one, like, he's not going to lose. That's a safe seat, and it was the opposite. Casey lost. Sherrod Brown lost, but that was not, that's not shocking. We knew that was a very touch and go race. And look, the whole thing is shocking on many levels. And I know probably many of you will be listening to this sometime the afternoon on Wednesday, trying to get your bearings, trying to get a sense of what happened, what'd you miss. I will tell you that, over the course of, as we came down to the wire in the election, I was in touch with many people kind of high up in Democratic campaigns, the people who actually know what they are seeing as a campaign. Not foot soldiers who maybe you want to keep morale up or something like that. And over the weekend, I had conversations with a number of people who are very hard boiled, who don't get excited and caught up in the moment. And those people were saying, I think we've got this, and I'm not sure it's going to be close. So this obviously came as a big shock to them. So, to the extent that you are feeling shock, what did I miss? A lot of people miss this. And the people who, should have had the access to the most information. Does that matter? That's sort of fine print, I guess, in a way. We have also discussed already in posts that people are feeling not just shock, but exhaustion. We've been at this for a decade, basically. And it seems, at least, that Donald Trump will win the popular vote. He didn't just slip in, right? This isn't 2016. So we are going to just walk through what we know of the wreckage this morning, because it's a bleak picture. There's no getting around that, and we are just going to discuss it all with you. So, Kate, let's get started.
I think let's start with, there's already been a bit of, we kind of previewed this last night, but recriminations of the Harris campaign, right? And kind of nitpicking over decisions that she made and what she chose to emphasize and what groups she courted. I think there's a lot we don't know right now, but from the data we have, it's pretty clear that this was a much greater atmospheric problem than any decisions of the Harris campaign. We know that in the states, that the swing states where she campaigned a lot, she did better. So that kind of indicates that where there was a kind of pop up Democratic favoring media apparatus, that message got through to people,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
suggests something I think about the way that the right has just completely taken over the media ecosystem that most people are exposed to. Um, we have on top of that the kind of rage against incumbency that has just dominated the Western world since COVID. I think coming out of this election, if there's one silver lining, it might be that, contrary to 2016, where when Hillary lost, the pretty universal reaction was, well, Hillary sucks in a special way.
And
This
she blew it,
time,
and that she
right,
made
and it was
all
her
these kind of
fault,
key decisions that doomed her, et
and
cetera.
any
Yeah.
other Democrat would have won. I think we can, first of all, question that a bit now that we've had 3 successive cycles of Trump building an interracial working class coalition, but also just that it seems that this loss is situated in such a hostile environment that I think it's really hard to look at these results and to be like, well, Bernie Sanders would have won, right? Or Joe Biden would have won. It seems that this race was lost for a long time. And I think the relative closeness of it was more a testament to Harris than anything else.
I think that's right. I mean, look, I wrote this post a couple days ago, but I said I thought she ran a basically flawless campaign, and I still think that. Does that matter? Who cares, right? It's whatever. But in some ways, one of the very few helpful things about the nature of this defeat is that this isn't about, like, she should have picked Josh Shapiro over Tim Walz, or like she campaigned too much with Liz Cheney, or this, that, or the other. This was a substantial shift to the right, basically everywhere. And as you said, it's even more so outside the swing states. I don't know what the final number is going to be, but she's going to be end up winning New Jersey by like 4 or 5 points. And New Jersey is, in recent cycles has been, leans in the New York, California direction of, like, double digit. It's not even a contest kind of thing. I haven't even looked at the precise numbers, but New York is the closest it's been in a generation. So, I look at this now, and I think it is, it's always hard to know what one makes of these kind of weird, historical hypotheticals, but this race was probably lost a year ago. And there is probably some degree to which, um, to my surprise, polls are still not getting some of these people who show up for Donald Trump. Um, but again, this is the big picture here, is that there was a great deal of immiseration coming out of the COVID pandemic, including the COVID pandemic. It was one kind of big rolling public disaster. Um, Inflation, housing prices, all these things. People were just very mad about that. And Joe Biden and the Democrats are the incumbent party, and they punished him severely. And I think Kamala Harris came into it in the last moment, kind of, stood up a campaign very quickly, and I think did a very good job. And it clearly just was not nearly enough. Um,
It's one of
so
those, in every election, it's hard to boil it down to one factor. But God, if we've ever had a kind of it's the economy stupid situation, I mean, you look at exit polls are imprecise, of course, but people who are very unhappy with the economy and who say the economy is their top issue. I mean, they went for Trump in gargantuan numbers. And we'd noted that she'd made up ground on that question. I just think between being saddled with the kind of aimed at Biden anger from the pandemic. And I do think in people's minds, Trump was not president during the pandemic. I think it is fully strapped to
Yep,
Biden. And so
I think
she
that's
had
right.
that to contend with. And again, she had 3 months and she made up ground, which is really difficult for a Democrat to do in this environment. But I just think she didn't make up enough ground fast enough. And then coupled with what we'll get into, the kind of media failures, if people also, especially in these non-swing states, aren't hearing about the platform that she basically crafted to address this specific concern, there's a reason why housing is so central to her slate of issues. Where does that leave you, right? I mean, just you've got angry people who are taking out their frustration on the one of the least popular incumbent presidents in history.
Yeah, I mean, there's been this theory that clearly not a theory that is in good shape at the moment. That I think that Ron Klain made this argument going into and coming out of the 2022 midterm, that we're in an era where everybody's mad and incumbents, you know, if you're in the low 40s, that's pretty good. Um, and you know, as I said, that theory is now uh, empirically under some stress, I would put it. But I do think he is right to the extent that all incumbents are there. But the follow on there, that everybody's unpopular and the person you're running against is also going to be unpopular. That link in the argument is not valid, because, as you said, we've seen incumbents have been getting crushed right and left everywhere. We just saw it. We just saw it in the UK. Now, different set of different set of details. The Tories been in power for, I don't know, something like 14 years, for kind of forever. Um, Not the case with Democrats, but again, it's everywhere, and I think it is unquestionably true that you know the pandemic is something that happened under Joe Biden. That is the understanding of it. Um, and the fact that that's not true is that's sort of fine print that is kind of not really relevant. I think the most generous way you can put it is that it did happen at the tail end of Trump's presidency. People remember, oh, the main thing was when everything was just normal, and then Joe Biden came in. I do continue to think, like, one of our I had just finished writing a piece that will be up by the time you are listening to this. Kind of, again, taking stock, saying a lot of the things that I'm saying now. And our editor, John Light, was reading it, and he flagged some pieces that I wrote. I don't know, sometime over the last year. I could have written it sort of any time over the last couple of years. And it was something like, living in the everything sucks era, because everything sucks, right? And when you're the incumbent party, that's going to be a very dangerous situation. Look, certainly the other part of this is that the American public did not have a normal center right party of government to hand it over to. That probably would have been an easy call. They were ready to hand it to this guy, and so we can't entirely brush over that. But you know, that's what happened.
I think what we're talking about right now is kind of the immediate environment bucket, right? Which on its own, while I mean devastating, right? Of course, putting this man in power is devastating, would not be perhaps a complete disaster for Democrats, because this is the condition, this is what's happening to incumbents. To some degree, it's kind of like, what can you do? But I think greater than that, since 2016, he has picked up vote share in every election. He's expanded his coalition to include young men from traditionally Democratic constituencies. The Latino swing was real. That really, really manifested in this election, despite the fact that he ran almost entirely a campaign premised on anti-immigrant rhetoric and promises of violence against those people. I just saw a reporter who was outside like an ICE hub with undocumented people, many of whom told the reporter that they would have voted for Trump and that they don't think he would deport them because they're here to work and they're not criminals. So I mean, eh, I don't know what you do with that, with people who are just so clearly kind of prepared to vote against their self-interest in that way. But that to me, that's the crisis. Like an anti-incumbency mood, people being grouchy about the economy, that sucks. And it really sucks when it's completely impossible to get through to those people about how those misconceptions could be off base. And that's a problem. But it's a bigger problem to me that he is building this working class coalition, and Democrats are increasingly being siloed into just being the party of the college educated. And that is not going to win elections in a country where most people don't go to college. So that's really worrisome to me, particularly because the Biden administration took such great pains to kind of staunch the bleeding with unions and really rebrand as a pro worker bastion. That was both in messaging and in deed. And Trump is a billionaire with golden toilets who stiffs every working person who is in his employ and who's increasingly filled his orbit with billionaires. And that is still a huge appeal for all these working class people. And that to me is the crisis. I that's Democrats are going to have to turn it around on that, and I'm not sure how that happens.
Yeah. 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 No, I mean, if you are really the party of the college educated and sort of middling to affluent, that is not, um, that's not a whole political coalition. That's clear. I do, and yeah, he has increased his vote share. There's no question about that. I mean, I do think that I, I I do think that we have to remember that we are talking about relatively small shifts in you know in in population totals on both sides of this. Obviously, which side of 50% you are on makes all the difference. But yeah, what you're describing is real, and I do think that it is definitely 2 points. One, it is definitely the case that Democrats cannot allow themselves to be stuck in the language and voice and mindset of affluent educated professionals, because that is not how most of the country talks and thinks. That's, we know that. um, I think that there is, well, I'll hand it over to you to the next point and I'll come back to that.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, but I'm a little bit wary about that explanation as well because Sherrod Brown just got kind of wiped off the map, and he's one of
Hmm.
the best examples of someone who's really successfully for a long time captured this version of liberal economic populism in a
Hmm.
place that is increasingly red. You could say the same about Tester.
Yep.
So I'm a little bit wary about these prescriptions that involve a repackaging of democratic policies. But by the same token, I'm a little wary of people who said, well, the platform is the problem. They got too far to the left or whatnot, because I think it was a really calculated platform that Harris pulled together, which was kind of specifically meant to court working class and young people who profess to be singularly concerned about the affordability of their lives. And
Hmm.
that didn't matter at all. And Trump did not try to address those things even a little bit, and that also didn't matter at all. And some of me is inclined to think that this is just, it's not any more complicated than the media ecosystem, where you've got a huge amount of the country being bombarded with right-wing propaganda all of the time, and it's nothing more sophisticated than that. Um, because I don't know that Harris pandered to the white collar suburbs of Philadelphia. I think that she tried to craft a specific argument for the disaffected people who nevertheless went for Trump by a lot this time.
There's another point we kind of that is sort of adjacent to what we were just discussing, and that is that after the 2020 election, or going into the 2020 election, there was, in the endless left right, internal debates within the Democratic Party, there was this idea that if you do a lot of social democratic, overtly social democratic policies, income redistribution, putting money in people's pockets, um, industrial policy, if you get squarely on the side of unions and union organizing, you will build a constituency. You will build there's two in all of the stuff that I'm talking about. There was a conjoined argument, a policy argument, and a political argument. The policy argument speaks for itself. They're good policies. They help people. Um, the other one is that it builds a political constituency for you. And again, there was, in those pre-pandemic or pre-pandemic, early pandemic debates, give people money, put people, this was literally what people were saying. And Joe Biden largely governed with the policy bundle of the progressive left, of the Democratic Party. There's going to be some disputing that. Obviously, there's not Medicare for all, stuff like that. But you don't have to take my word for it. Take Bernie Sanders' word for it. And uh, I'm already seeing a lot of, you know, Biden was too centrist. He was too this. He wasn't progressive enough. He didn't have a kind of a sufficiently kind of working class politics. That is a deep amnesia that we are seeing within the Democratic coalition. And I'm not saying here, oh no, it was a disaster. He governed too far to the left, and so nothing, and so here we are. Speaking for myself, I think those were good policies. I'm glad he did them. But the part of that argument was that they will build this constituency. That part of the political argument fails totally. Now, we can obviously say, it failed in the context of this period of public immiseration, or whatever. But Joe Biden, and not just Joe Biden, arm in arm with House and Senate progressives, and bringing along a lot of people who used to be identified as kind of the more centrist wing of the party, did these things, and it didn't matter. It didn't build that constituency. It when you did polling, no one even knew it happened. No one knew that he did it. It just, so, and that is and again, I'm not here on, again, I think they were good policies. I'm glad we did them. But I think we have to reckon with the fact that that idea that you do good policies and people are going to like them and then support you at elections, that premise is in tatters right now.
And then the big question around that is the problem the policy, or is the problem the messaging? Are the policies good, but people don't know about them, or they're not being communicated in the right way? Or is it the policy platform itself? And I'm more inclined to think that it's the messaging just because this stuff polls really popularly, but I don't think we know that. And to some degree, maybe the lesson you take away from this is people are going to freak the fuck out about inflation. So you need to stay super far away from stimulus measures of any kind, you know? But I keep coming back to this, but I think the media ecosystem thing is a huge problem. Like, Democrats have been waging war, this is a mix of metaphor, but with refs who either acknowledge that they are playing for the Republican team or would say that they're not, but they pretty clearly are and have been for a lot of years. And there's only so many times I think you can win in such an asymmetric environment. And the right, and particularly the quote unquote kind of new right, the bro right, the manosphere that Trump courted this entire time, reaches millions of people, and it's solidly right wing, and it's conspiratorial, and it's MAGA, right? And you layer that on top of the quote unquote old guard of kind of Fox News and kind of shock jock radio or whatever, and all of a sudden, other than the kind of liberals who are already in your camp, who are reading the New York Times and watching CNN or whatever, who's left? The whole rest of the country is in a right-wing propaganda stew, and the left has absolutely nothing to counter it. And the problem is that this is not at all a new revelation, right? Like, the crooked media Pod Save America enterprise was predicated on the idea that there needed to be a progressive answer to Fox News. And while that podcast is very popular, it doesn't come anywhere near the reach of the kind of right-wing environment. And we've talked before about why the left can never really mirror what the right is doing, because the left has kind of ethical standards and news standards and operates in a different way. And I don't know how you kind of square that circle.
Yeah, well, I think to a great degree, the left we need to say here, we're talking about the sort of the broad center left, kind of everything from the 50-yard line of American politics to the left, prizes empiricism, ideas of accuracy. It prizes things that are in tension with that sort of propagandistic way of public communication. So it is sort of kind of built into who those people are, who we are. That can that can sound sort of self-serving, but I do think it is. I think it's accurate. One thing I think we have to say is that when people's prices go up a lot quickly, especially for people who live paycheck to paycheck, which is where a lot of this deterioration took place, people are going to notice that. They're really going to notice that, and they're going to be upset about it. So I think we have to recognize that, right? We have to say it is a big deal. And we saw over the last year, as inflation was going down, that people were saying, okay, wait, but the prices haven't gone down. They're still much higher. You have this basic disconnect, talking different languages. So I think we have to recognize, I mean, again, it's the era of everything sucks. That kind of inflation shock is going to really hit people, and they're going to be upset about it. And the reality is that we had not seen anything like that in basically 40 years. So really no one except, I'm 55, and I remember sort of 70s inflation when I was like 7, right? No one has any. You have to be very old to have any kind of like working life memory of that, right? And so it was new, and it's a big deal. And you, it's funny, before everything sort of fell apart last night, I got this email from a reader who said something like, the Democrats they've been lying to themselves about inflation and how big a deal it is, and they still haven't done anything about to address it in the campaign. Um, it happened, and Joe Biden was president when it happened. So I just kind of resist the idea that it didn't occur to anybody that it was a big deal, or they decided not to um, not to do anything about it, because it happened, and Joe Biden was president when it happened. And the fact that it was worse in other countries and took longer to fix in other countries, that's fine print for most
I, th-
voters.
I don't want to not talk about the fact too that Trump ran a more sexist and racist and xenophobic version of his campaign than he did last time, and it was clearly really attractive to people. And I mean that's a huge part of it as well. I think we won't ever know, and the conditions were gruesome to begin with, but there's almost no way that kind of some of the slippage with men was because Harris was a woman running. That Trump has kind of turned the MAGA stuff even into an even greater version of promising retribution and even violence towards out groups, and that was really attractive to people. I mean, I don't think that everyone would be feeling quite so devastated if he had just run his campaign on, lamenting the economy. I think the
Hmm.
reason why it's so painful is that more than ever before, he defined an enemy, and it's minority groups in America, and people, including members of those minority groups, lapped it up, were willing to vote for it. Seemingly, like, these undocumented people have kind of fooled themselves into thinking that, oh, well, that's those others. That's not me. I'm a good member of this minority group, so I kind of count. Um, I think that a lot of those delusions are going to be laid pretty bare by the administration that he runs, by the playbook that's been available for months, that kind of shows that his idea of power is built on hurting vulnerable people, um, like every authoritarian's power is based on. So, that's in the stew as well. And I'm not saying that you kind of could have taken an old white man like Biden and avoided this bloodshed. I think this is all part of the same soup.
I mean, you'll forgive me. I have not dug into all the statistical details of which voting groups did what yet. I have less of a sense of African Americans versus Hispanics in the sort of erosion of support for Democrats in different ethnic and racial communities. Some of that is that Black and Hispanic men are Black and Hispanic. They're also men. You know that it is one of these obvious things, and you need to repeat it to yourself sometimes. There is also always going to be, you mentioned with I guess asylum seekers outside of an ICE office saying, I would have voted for Trump. Like, okay, I don't know what to tell you. uh there is always a great desire for in there is always a great desire, sometimes a greater desire, among historically marginalized or or disadvantaged slash oppressed communities to, like, I'm not like the other ones. I want to be part of the in group. That's always, that is clearly something that has challenged Democrats' outreach to Hispanic voters for the last decade. You have many Hispanic voters who say, I am not here as an asylum seeker. My parents were born here. My grandparents were born here. I'm not. Why is that? That has nothing to do with me. Obviously, not everybody thinks that way, but some do, and it is, and I think the vast majority of Democrats who are from those communities, work with those communities, run campaigns and outreach to those communities, know that immigration. There are many other things that Hispanic voters are concerned about besides immigration. If that's obvious, but it's still a challenge, and I'm not sure that challenge is going to be one that will is going to yield obvious solutions for us in the next few days for how to deal with that.
One point I want to discuss is whether or not Dobbs's salience has ebbed, and if that's something we see in this election. There were abortion amendments in 10 states voted on them. 7 of them voted for them, and Florida would have as well if Republicans hadn't jacked it up to a 60% threshold. So that's, pretty good evidence, I think, that it's still quite popular. We also, though, had the first episodes of states voting against abortion rights by a simple majority, and that was in South Dakota, which was resounding, and Nebraska, which was just a bare 51%. Nebraska also had dueling amendments, so a pro-abortion rights one and an abortion restrictions one. So it picked the restrictions by 51%.
Was it structured as an either or, like almost like a candidate race?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, I mean, they were 2 independent amendments. But it
Got it.
wasn't like,
Okay.
here's the yes side, here's the no side, pick one. It was abortion protections and then abortion restrictions after the first trimester. I think they were
Got it.
kind of
Got it.
situated as their own options.
Understood. 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 Nebraska's a
So,
little surprising, but
yeah,
there you are.
I mean, and I guess you can argue 51%, right? That's real close.
Yeah.
But, you also had kind of a spirited Senate race there from Dan Osborne, who
Hmm.
ended up not playing it off. But so you can't really argue like, well, Democrats had nothing at all to Democrats or the abortion rights aligned people had nothing to vote for. Um, and that's just a data point. Those are the first states to have rejected it post Dobbs. And then I saw a chart from NBC that had every state that the abortion amendment was on the ballot, that percentage of the vote versus Kamala's,
Hmm.
and the chasm was enormous. I mean, in some states, it doubled up her vote. And to some degree, it's like, that's not new to us, right? Because in Missouri, they voted to overturn their complete abortion ban with this measure. And then they also voted for Josh Hawley, who will vote for a national abortion ban if he gets the chance. So
Right.
this is not,
Right.
this is a cognitive dissonance we were kind of used to. But it's a little jarring when you have a candidate that made such a huge part of her pitch preserving reproductive rights that the salience of having those topics on the ballot did not seem to permeate out to her even a little bit, and even
Hmm.
in very blue states including Maryland and New York, and then all the way to super red states where abortion is very, very threatened.
Right. 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 So okay. So it does. I it's a little surprising, the two states. So look, at the end of the day, there is the the MAGA movement is a funny thing in the sense that there is a huge part of it that could not give a fuck about abortion. Or let me put that more precisely. They're not pro-life. They think that's nonsense. That you're right. There's a lot of MAGA people that are like that, and frankly, Donald Trump's probably like that. It's just part of it's how he it's part of his shtick that's who he aligns with. So unfortunately, that is not you have you're down with that agenda, but you want abortion rights, and that's hooray for Missouri. That I don't know exactly what that amendment gives them in Missouri, But I would assume, well, is it more or less kind of the Ohio row
Hmm.
kind of thing? Right. Well, it'll be interesting to see in these states the extent to which the Republican dominated governments, try to play games and chip away or do sort of like, harassment of abortion clinics or something like that. I guess it probably depends a lot on uh, some states. These are basically laws. Some states they are amount to suggestions of laws the legislature needs to pass, unless maybe they don't want to pass it. Other cases, it's constitutional.
It'll be interesting. I mean, they're almost all constitutional amendments at this point. It's pretty clear that activists see those as the most ironclad. Look at somewhere like Florida, right, where DeSantis was running this quote unquote voter fraud stuff into the petition signatures pretty clearly to lay the groundwork to challenge the vote, if it had
Yeah.
passed. Um, but in almost every state where they've had it on the ballot, Republicans have tried to use the levers of government to thwart it in various ways. We've seen attempts to hike the thresholds in other states. Almost every state will countenance challenge to the ballot language from the Republican officials.
Yeah, no, I that is true. I think it's possible that once it's done, you're presumably, you're not going to run another. If 58%, 57 or 58% of the public votes for it, you're not going to put it on the ballot again. That's not going to change anytime soon. And I would think, if you are a Republican and you dominate the state, you don't want to create a situation where you're making people choose. Do you want Republican legislators, or do you want someone who's going to protect your abortion rights? You kind of, who knows? I certainly agree with you. It is remarkable the degree to which Republicans have gone to sort of like, oh, we'll just change language. So yes, they did everything they could. I do think that it is the realistic estimation of the political impact of these amendments, these propositions beyond the proposition themselves, is that you bring out some extra people, but it's not gonna it's not gonna bring out 10% extra people.
Right.
It's sort of like ground operations. It's, if you're losing, you're gonna lose.
I mean, and maybe if you're a Republican, state legislator, you just kind of channel your energies into hoping for a national abortion ban, which, we were discussing this off air. It looks right now like Republicans have the easier path to winning the House majority. It's all going to come down to California, which takes about a decade to count its votes. So we're not going to know for a while. But this is part of why I wanted to talk about Dobbs' salience, because if you're a Republican, your biggest concern going into this election was that the abortion stuff was going to bite you on the ass, right? This is why Trump kind of barked at a reporter at the right when he was voting, like, stop asking me how I voted on the abortion amendment. He doesn't want to talk about it. They haven't found a good way to situate themselves on the issue. And it did matter. It really mattered in the midterm elections. I think we're seeing a dynamic where there is an actual band of people that were activated by Dobbs, but they're overwhelmed, I think, by more normie voters in the presidential cycles, right? It's kind of the reversal of how the fates of the Democratic and Republican parties used to be. The people who are really mad about Dobbs seem to be, and the ones who are willing to vote for Democrats because of it, seem to be of this camp of kind of, high civic duty, high news consumer type people. But after this election, I wouldn't be really cowering in my boots about abortion. I mean, Democrats tried to hammer it at every turn. There was no huge wave of furious suburban women. At this point, Harris has not improved on Biden's margins in a single county. And she was, you know,
Nationwide.
nationwide. And
God.
she was unbelievably more comfortable and a more natural spokesperson for the reproductive rights movement than Biden, who was kind of
Mhm.
famously and visibly uncomfortable with it, ever was. That didn't turn up in the numbers, right? That didn't really seem to help her. If I was a Republican, I would be a little less wary about kind of doing abortion crackdowns than I would have been before. And we know this is something that even if Trump doesn't like it, and even if he thinks that abortion is kind of like a problem for him and something he doesn't particularly care about anyway, the people who are kind of in his right wing scaffolding really care about it, right? Like it's a central issue for kind of the Leonard Leos and the Heritage Foundation and those kind of people, and particularly the religious right. So I'm not feeling as particularly confident that there won't be an abortion ban or, an attempt to kind of weaponize the Comstock Act or some way to curtail the procedure that they would do in a way that doesn't seem to kind of engender maybe the backlash that a quote unquote
Right.
national ban would.
No, I to your basic point, I think Republicans have to be thinking like, it was a little bumpy banning abortion, but like, okay, we did
Here
it.
we are now, right?
Yeah, here we won the presidency. We we may win the whole Congress, and like, it kind of hurt us in 2022, but like for something we've been trying to do for 45 years, like, okay, like, that was not too much. And to your point, I mean, it's not that I don't think they would try. I do, assuming they have a very narrow margin in the House, which I think is unquestionable. It'll be narrow if they hold on to the House. But are you going to be able to get those people like in the Hudson Valley and in Southern California to vote for your abortion ban? That's probably going to be a tough lift. Um, but on stuff like, you just find that mifepristone is actually not that safe, and you take it off the market. And you just say that's not an abortion ban. That's just, we did a few more tests and whatever. So those kind of things, and whether you do that through, whether you do that, I mean, heck, what is it? RFK Jr. is going to be like in charge of the the FDA.
Apparently in charge of the whole cabinet. I mean, every time he does an interview, it's HHS and then it's agriculture and then it's the FDA. It's like, babe, you can't have that many jobs. Those are not all the same entity.
Yeah, I mean, as we know, sort of, management as a formal discipline is not the focus of either of these men, certainly. But yes, he seems to be understanding the mandate that he's getting from Trump as both cradle to grave and soil to septic tank, right? Everything that goes from production to consumption to everything, anything having to do with your body is under his brief. That I who knows what that means. I mean, it's it may mean something like he is health czar, and it will be yet another one of these. He'll have a little office in the White House and talk a lot, and maybe he'll be in charge of everything, and maybe he won't. And I don't mean that in a sense of oh, maybe it won't be that bad. I just mean in the sense that Trump always promises a bunch of things to 10 different people, and then it's just it kind of what emerges from the chaos. So who knows? And I do think we will have a very basic, one of the rubber hitting the road issues over the next few years will be, do you still have an FDA where panels of clinicians and scientists decide, is this chemical something you can put in your body? We broadly, that's been something that has been in place for there's different groups who do different things, but this is a century-old system, basically. And it's We already saw in Trump's first term, you kind of put your thumb on the scale, all this kind of stuff. But maybe you just say like, "Hey, Bobby said so, and we're gonna have this drug, and you can use it, and or this one drug you can't use it, and it can't be used in the country anymore." There, which we have a kind of a lattice work of regulations and very broad laws, and which of these things is really statutory, right? Which of these things is really the law that you can't do it some other way? That can get put to the test pretty quickly, and we know that there is there's a there's a standard if you're a Democrat, and there's a standard if you're a Republican. So and as crazy and terrifying as these things are, you have a whole system in this country of the medical profession, pharmaceuticals, how things are done in hospitals, and they all kind of interact and work together. If the government's part of that goes rogue, what what do doctors do? Again, these things are there's a whole there is a whole set of guardrails for these. We know about guardrails in politics. There are guardrails in medicine and health and all these kind of things, and we may be seeing that.
That's kind of the crux that I'm most worried about under a Trump too, is areas where he slash his kind of fanatic people are interested in the same thing that the more quote unquote establishment right wing infrastructure is interested in. And, the weakening of federal agencies and taking away their authority falls really squarely in that bucket, right? And that's something the Supreme Court is interested in furthering. So, that is all part of a same kind of fearsome package. Before we wrap up, we're getting to the end here. I wanted to talk about this twofold idea of kind of what does resistance to the Trump administration look like, both from quote unquote elites and from normal people. And also this idea of I'm not super into this whole like Democratic recriminations thing, like blaming the Republican Party on Democrats, which is something that critics and media outlets alike love to do. But I do think there's really something to this idea that Democrats' allergy to holding Trump accountable in any kind of serious way has both empowered him and resisted the lesson that this person is really dangerous and has done unacceptable things and is unfit for power. A really common tweet that was kind of shooting around has been, sure would be nice if we had an attorney general the last 4 years. This all part and parcel with this idea that Democrats wanted to turn the page after January 6th. Apart from the January 6th committee, there wasn't an emphasis on accountability, that the Trump prosecutions took forever to get started, and then he was able to run out the clock. And now, of course, we're on the precipice of a time where he is going to get rid of the federal prosecutions against him. The state ones, I'm not super confident about either. He's probably kind of bought his way out of legal jeopardy. And I think that matters. Like, I know we've reached a time where it kind of felt like there's nothing you can do to hold Trump to account. He wiggled his way out of that jam, didn't he? But they could have done a lot more, and they didn't want to, and they wanted to kind of turn the page and do a whole like an early version of we're not going back, right? We're in democratic governance now, and isn't it so much better? And it turns out that when people have really Nat-like memories, that lack of accountability just means that Trump comes out the other side smelling more like roses than he ever has before.
Yeah. No, I think you hit the nail on the head that Democratic elites, members of the legal profession, those different overlapping groups, said we have come back from craziness. We're now doing the old thing where you uh, have a lot of deference and caution. You want to be very careful about any perception of persecuting the people you defeated, who you defeated. And there's a process, and you follow the process. And if we had reset the clock to when this anomaly, the crazy anomalous period is at an end now, those things make a lot of sense. But some of that is, that kind of hackneyed line, you don't bring a knife to a gunfight. And this is really a gunfight about civic democracy in this country. And yeah, I think that, there's all the debates about, well, you just didn't see it publicly until, mid 2022. That doesn't mean it wasn't happening. Okay, or not, if it really, those things make sense if you do not question the entire construct. And if you have someone try to overthrow the government through violence, and you are still trying to get to trial 4 years later, you messed up. The detail, you can figure out the details, but you messed up. That's too long. And that is, that's a reality. Yeah, and I get why people are resistant to that. They don't want to, become or appear, to be strongmanism when they're trying to fight it. But you can be too cautious, and I think it's pretty clear they were, and so here we are.
Now, I want to talk about what pinch points there'll be for a Trump administration. I think one of them will be slim margins in the House will make it harder to do completely crazy things. It seems that they'll have a fairly healthy margin in the Senate. Of course, Democrats will use the filibuster all the time. It'll really put pressure on Republicans to see if they're willing to blow it up for some of their more kind of culture war type stuff, or if they'll continue in the knowledge that it kind of behooves them to have it in place to block liberal legislation, knowing that they can still do judges and they can still do budget reconciliation, tax cut stuff. I think blue state governors are going to emerge as really important figures. I think we can expect an awful lot of kind of federal government versus Gavin Newsom stuff. You think about, you've got the state cases in Georgia and in New York, where, obviously Georgia has a Republican, but you're going to have kind of like Fani Willis versus Trump stuff. You're going to have, Kathy Hochul kind of allow the state level prosecution to go onwards when, Trump is going to try to, threaten or cajole her out of that situation. And it does tie back a little bit to this idea that I think Democrats need to be really aggressive from here on out. I mean, the biggest problem is going to be that it's almost certain, right, that at least Alito, if not Alito and Thomas, are going to step down so Trump can put in like 30-year-olds. And that is a generation. That is a generation, at least, on the court. I mean, it's heartbreaking, but that means when Democrats get the votes back, they have to add seats. They have to do the kind of reform that they haven't even tiptoed up till this point. Like, they're still afraid to reform the filibuster to pass abortion rights. I did a whole bunch of pre-writes for if Kamala wins. And I talked to a lot of people who were really on the fence about if they were going to be able to do it for abortion rights. People said, well, the chances are probably better for democracy reforms, but I don't know. I don't know about abortion rights. And that is a carve out to pass a specific bill that we weren't sure that everybody was like kind of on board with. So that's where I think there needs to be a sea change within the Democratic Party. I'm a little less sold on that you got to revamp your platform and get better at talking to the common folk stuff, but I am very much on board with the lack of aggression has hurt the party, has emboldened Trump, has let people think that what Trump did was fine, and that is now that just can't continue, because if Democrats ever get the chance to rule again, they absolutely are going to have to be so much bolder than what we've seen from these kind of elite Democrats in the past in order to put up guardrails that Trump can't just kind of rip out of the ground again.
No, I think that's right. And Democrats have to be prepared to think about everything from the ground up. And I do think that what you are describing is the bigger deal. Like, I don't think, and I'm trying in every way I can not to get into intra-democratic debates here, but I don't think this is about we need Medicare for all, not Obamacare. Maybe that may also be, I'm not, other people may decide otherwise. But you can't be playing by a different set of rules than your political opponents are. And that is clearly the case now. And unfortunately, Democrats will have a good deal of time to think about, how they will approach things the next time they're in power, unfortunately.
I wanted to just end with, we're in a dark place. I think a lot of our listeners are probably feeling pretty horrible. So I want to conclude on what is a hope that we both have going into the Trump administration, whether it be a silver lining or a saving grace or what have you. For me, my hope is that between the thin margin in the House and the flip side of the coin of having kind of RFK-esque psychos around you in your administration, is that they're not that good at the government. They don't really know how stuff works. I'm hoping for a higher level of incompetency that some are worried about. I don't doubt his authoritarian tendencies, or that the people around him want to use his kind of like shallowness and toddler-esque lack of object permanence to kind of put him to their own ends. But we had 4 years of Trump. A lot of bad stuff happened, but he also fumbled an awful lot of bad stuff that he wanted to do. And that's because, his lack of discipline, the people around him not having any kind of institutional knowledge, and that stuff does matter. It seems dumb and we yell at Democrats for it a lot, but Joe Biden never would have been able to be so legislatively successful if the people who worked for and around him didn't kind of know it inside and out and have a lot of success legislatively and know how to kind of work those levers. So, as much as I have a quote unquote kind of hope, it's that, our goes back to what someone told me in 2020, it's really lucky that Trump is too lazy to be a good fascist, right? I mean, that he'll have more difficulty in implementing some of his more horrific agenda items than we think.
Mine, I have two. Mine are similar. I think that, and you can already see that Trump, his people, they are saying this is a mandate for dramatic change. It's an overwhelming mandate. I don't think that is true. I think they will, but they are going to think it is true. And I think you will see some things like what happened in early 2005 when George W. Bush won a narrow election victory. Also, held on to Congress and started pushing through a bunch of things that people had never heard of before, and were like, "What the fuck?" and there was a big backlash. I think that will happen. Um, and I think that people who care about this country need to be ready for that. I also think on a sort of broader, more philosophical level, there is a quote that I always think about from Adam Smith, the guy who wrote Wealth of Nations. And that is his quote: "There's a lot of ruin in a nation." And often it's hard to know what that means. It's like, what does that mean exactly? Um, what it means is that nations are resilient. They can absorb a lot more destruction than you might think, and come back from it. And I think that is true about this country. It is very hard to live through it, um, in many ways. But those are the two things that both a philosophical point and a prediction point that give me some hope. This isn't the end. This is a very dark moment, and we will have to see in the months ahead how things unfold and act accordingly.
So, to end with a programming note, we said that we were going to do recordings every day this week. That was kind of predicated on the idea that every piece of this race would take a lot longer to call. That's not so much the case now. So, more just going to play it by ear. Of course, we'll have our regular schedule to stick to. We're keeping an eye on big developments, particularly who wins the House, though that could take a while. So just to kind of give you an update on our plans there, but we'll be definitely in your feed, on our regularly scheduled Wednesday episodes.
Yeah. And I think that is all we have for right now. It's quite a lot, but we will talk to you next week, if not sooner. Anything else?
Nope. See you then.
See ya.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe wherever you listen.